So if you see science and policy in the way of interaction, primarily there are two activities, which is using science with a capital S, which is the enterprise of science through its actions, through its activities, are giving out scientific data, scientific inputs to decision making, to have informed choices. So that is science for policy, and we can even call that as science advice. So science advice can be used for not just policy making, but also for other decision making like program planning and program implementation, so on and so forth. But here in this term, science informing policy decisions is science advice. But in this first webinar, and also this is going to be associated with the article that we are going to put forth in our Science Policy Forum, we are going to talk about the second activity in the interaction between science and policy, which is science policy, to be very precise. So this is just as opposite of science for policy, which is policy for science. In a sense, a policy document or a statement coming from a public policy making authority or a body to advance, promote, regulate, or set priorities inside the enterprise of sciences. So that we call as science policy. And in the example that has been used in our audience poll, we've seen how many people have said the scientific data used for climate change decisions as science policy. It actually explains why we need to have such discourse and such webinars to get that right. If you see this diagram, the science for policy, which is science advice at one side, and policy for science, which is drafting policies to promote, advance, regulate, or whatever we call with science. So the policies for science and science for policy has an interaction, an overlap activity. And from that example, we could clearly say that the data used to inform climate change decisions are scientific data for policy decisions. So that is science advice. That is not science policy to say, but that is not completely exclusive. That has an overlap with science policy. For example, a science policy or science tech innovation policy having a focus on climate change related issues will also have how do we advance our scientific understanding in climate modeling and climate change related basic and advanced research. So that is the overlap area or intersecting area, which is standing at the intersection of science for policy and policy for science. And if we still have doubt in differentiating what is science policy and what is science advice, we would be happy to discuss this through during our discussion time at the end of this presentation.
So in the meantime, there's another audience poll that we will launch at the moment, into this effect. Just hold 1 minute. Okay, so you will be able to see an audience poll. So let us know who you think makes public policies related to science, technology, innovation in India. We'll give about 5 more seconds to close this poll. Okay, so we're going to end that poll and we'll share the results with you. So it looks like the top most answer is government. 64% of you think this, and 36% of you have said all of the above. So let's again find out from Chagun what the right answer is. Chagun?
Yeah, thanks, Lakshmi. That's again a very interesting poll result. Of course, we expected a spectrum of responses, but yeah, audiences are already well informed, let's say. But it's not very easy to choose between one of those options, to be very honest. All of the above is the right answer, but the question is placed. The question is framed in a way that who makes public policies related to STI, right? So who makes STI policies? If that was the question, all of the above is the exactly right answer. A public policy is usually made by government entities, keeping all the stakeholders in mind. So in our personal opinion and also through our studies, public policies related to STI in India at least is made by government agencies. So it's government. So let us just go a little deeper into who actually makes STI policies in India. So I just want to spend probably 30 seconds or more in this particular slide, because this is what gives a mandate to any agency, a government agency, to initiate or execute a task, particularly related to business of the government. The allocation of business rules, 1961, and recent update is August 2019. It's a Government of India allocation of business rule, which states the Ministry of Science and Technology and the primary body within the Ministry of Science and Technology, which is DST, Department of Science and Technology, its foremost mandate is formulation of policies related to science and technology. So this is the single point document which actually gives the mandate to DST to be as a nodal agency to draft, to initiate activities related to STI policy. And in addition to that, there are other set of activities that DST is drawing its mandate from this particular document. People who are interested in knowing what it is, I would recommend you to take this document and go through page 134 and 135. So in terms of actors who are involved in science policy making in India, the government side, like I said, DST plays the nodal agency role. So it coordinates, initiates, and kind of builds synergy between various agencies within and outside government to have this policy process in place. In addition to DST, there are two apex level or cross-cutting S&T agencies. One is the Office of Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, which has interlinks and cross-cutting mandate with other ministries, particularly the scientific ministries. Niti Aayog has a division which is elsewhere Planning Commission, which has a division focused on science and technology. So they do play a major role in bringing all the stakeholders and also contributing directly by giving policy recommendations and suggestions. In addition to that, we have Ministry of Earth Sciences, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, and Ministry of Human Resource Development as key players. And it's not only limited to these agencies or S&T bodies, right? Time to time, the number of government agencies involved in this particular activity, which is STI policy making process, differs. We so far had in India 4 science policies, starting from our first science policy statement till the recent STI policy 2013. The stakeholder numbers vary, but primarily these are the stakeholders from the government side, or let's say actors or players in this process. From the academia, we do have our national academies who play a major role, because these 3 national academies are like knowledge base of India's S&T, and they do provide recommendations in the form of reports or direct consultations or expert opinions and so forth. but it's not only the academies who play the role of giving inputs, right? And this is the way how the academic ecosystem brings their voices or representation to the policy making process. In addition to the academies, we do have some institutions represented in the policy making process directly through the consultation. The institutes like IITs, IICs, ISERs, and other central and state universities, they do participate in this policy process. And then industry stakeholdership, it's mostly the federations of industry who play a major role in this policy process because they collectively represent the voice of industry. CII, FICCI, and ASSOCHAM are primary industry bodies in India, and they regularly participate in policy consultations, and they are main actors in this process. In addition to participating in these consultations, they do conduct consultations on their own to try to get feedback and opinions from their members, like industry members, and take it to direct policy making table. In addition to the collective inputs given by these associations, we do most of the time have industry representation in a direct form, which is some industry leader who has a position to take and also having a major stake in defining how the industry system or industry space works in India, participate in this policy process. Maybe in detail when we go down, we'll see how so far we have seen this participation taking different shapes. The fourth is, this category is just for our understanding. See, we started from the government agencies, academia, industry, and knowledge institutions, which are think tanks, both government and private think tanks. This division doesn't really exist in the policy process. It's just that they know how these stakeholders stand in the whole ecosystem, STA ecosystem, and they come together and do it. The coordinating role lies with DST. But from the past experiences, we compiled this list, and this tells us that there is a clear list of players who exist in India. As far as the knowledge institutions who participate in this activity are concerned, we have institutions like TIFAC, Technology Assessment Forecast and Assessment Council, which is an autonomous body of DST, but still it has its own mandate to work on technology assessment, forecasting, and predictions. And we do have CSIR institutions like CSIR NISTATS, which is a policy institution, act as a think tank, not just to CSIR, but to the whole country in various capacity. In addition to NISTATS, we also have another CSIR institution, which is not listed here, is CSIR NISCARE, the Science Communication Institute of CSIR, who do bring out collective knowledge of CSIR and others in form of reports and other policy bulletins. Then this is a recent addition, which is DST Centers for Policy Research, let's say 5 years old, and these are created by DST for the sole purpose of getting engaged in more rigorous way in this STA policy process. And then we have institutions like NIAS, National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore, who not by mandate, but by their expertise, be part of this policy process, give inputs on time to time, and in most of these policy discussions, they do play a role of consulting agencies, not just in official capacity, also in other capacities. And also we have RIS, Research and Information System for Developing Countries. It's in New Delhi, which is a premier think tank in India, and they do also play a major role in providing knowledge in this policy making process. And there are many more, both private and government think tanks, and we could maybe list out more in our article, which is going to come out in few days along with this webinar posting. So the next section of this webinar would be how these STA policies are made, right? We have seen who are the actors now. And the process, if you can understand, this is going to help us because whoever is actually listening to this webinar, I'm sure that there is something in mind that how do we contribute to this policy process? I have some thoughts and I want it to be reflected in the policy process. For that to happen, we want to know how this policy process is actually happening. let's start with this committee formation. So every time when there is a need for a new STI policy is felt, when we say collectively STI, we could say science, technology, innovation together, or just about science, or about technology, or technology-led innovation altogether. And the interface and interaction between science, technology, and innovation itself is a topic of discussion. Like, why always science comes first and technology comes next? And then why is it always technology should lead innovation? Why isn't it the other way around? So technology could also form base for understanding science, and then innovation can come from anywhere, not only from science and technology. So all that is another completely different set of discussions. We will focus here on the process of the policy making in the realm of STI. So we don't have to limit ourselves to science, technology, innovation, at least in this webinar. So as far as this process is concerned, DST, as we stated, they draw this mandate. So they initiate the process of identifying a chair to form a committee. So far in the last 4 policies, which is science policy statement, technology policy statement, science and technology policy, and science technology innovation policy 2013. So we had 4 such policies, and it is evident from these names that we are evolving from science and technology, and then science and technology to innovation. So all that forms under the realm of STA policy making as of now. We don't know, maybe there is going to be another alphabet added to this in future, but as of now, it's a realm of STI. DST takes the initiation and forms the committee, and the committee is the first member of the committee is the chair. The chair is identified by internal consultation, like usually in double quotes, a prominent leader in Indian science is identified as a chair. And the chair then, in consultation with officials in various ministries and related SMT bodies of government and other academic and industry experts, form the list of members. Like, they identify the members for that committee. And they do take care in this identification process, a gender balance, a proper representation geographically, field-wise sectoral representation, and representation from the 4 sectors that we discussed, which is government side, academia, industry, and knowledge-based side. The knowledge-based side also includes non-governmental organizations and civil society representations. And the committee is formed. Now, this committee doesn't start from the scratch, right? So the need for policy is always felt through various means, either by an evaluation process of previous policies, and then the outcomes and insights of it, or there is a top-down approach that a new government has come up and there is a vision for STI, a different vision, and they want to revisit the policies that exist in STI, and then this need is felt. So there is some kind of guideline already exists. Let's say an outline for this policy already exists when this committee comes into picture. And then this committee goes for consultations. So the primary consultation, the first consultation, starts with that outline document or priorities in mind, and then they come up with a first draft, which they would take it for subsequent consultations. The first draft doesn't just come from the identified members and chairs sitting together and discussing. The first draft actually takes into consideration various policy documents and recommendations submitted to this committee directly, or the committee scouts for those documents outside and brings it to the table and forms the draft. And in subsequent consultation, the members actually debate and zero down few priorities, the way to approach those policy questions, and kind of, let's say, in the final consultation, they come to a near final draft of that particular committee. That near final draft is something which the members have agreed, members of that committee have agreed, but it is not only the members who have given the input. This consultation doesn't happen in one go. right? So these consultations happen in different time scale, which is also in numbers. Most of the time, these consultations are like more than 3, 4, or 5. To give an example, 2013 policy of STI, India's STI policy 2013 had 7 consultations, not in Delhi, not only in Delhi, but in different parts of the country. So in between those, there are other forms that these members or the chair of the committee get some insights through different conferences, meetings, and consultations. And that also get incorporated into the draft. And then the finalized draft, once the chair approves the draft, it is put in place for larger consultation, which is one, this draft is submitted to various ministries for their internal consultations and to bring back feedback so that to get incorporated. And in parallel, this draft is also online or offline given to larger public consultation. So here it's I mean, principally, this is open for anybody. Literally anybody can comment on the draft. Practical way how it is happening so far is DST uploads this document for a public consultation in its DST site, and anyone can just go log in, download, give comments over a particular section or the overall document in general. And these 2 tracks of consultation happen for, let's say, few months. Then the committee meets again, taking all those feedbacks into consideration. They do adapt that final draft and come up with a consolidated, let's say, inclusive policy document, which here the word inclusive means it's not only the committee's view, the public consultation is taken and the feedback is recorded from various ministries, and that all incorporated into the policy document now. So that document, once the committee chair approves, goes for cabinet's approval. Usually this process is taken over by DST, I mean the administrative process of submitting this document to cabinet for approval. And cabinet evaluates, and maybe there is some time lag there because the cabinet actually vets this document with maybe, let's say, internal committee, or maybe they want to have some more time to be given for that to take little more shape internally, and then they submit it back to the committee through DST to finalize the document if any comments were made by the cabinet committee. Once that is done, DST finalizes the document, makes it ready to release version, and usually these policy documents or statements are released in some, let's say, historic days, or in, mostly it is happening in so far happening in Indian Science Congresses. For example, 2013 policy document, the need for 2013 policy document was expressed in 2012 Indian Science Congress, and the policy process went on for the whole year. In 2013 Indian Science Congress released the policy document of STIP 2013, and the release is mostly by a top leader of the country. Prime Minister actually released in the case of STIP 2013. He released a copy and it is given to the president of the country. So there is no written rule that it has to happen this way, but this is how it has happened. So primarily, if you want to summarize how the process of policy works, STA policy making works in India, it starts from the committee formation and released by some top leadership of the country. And in our article, we are going to actually elaborate in different sections in list of steps in which this process works. So this is a case example of how STA policy 2013 actually got formulated. Like I said in the previous slide, in 2012 Indian Science Congress the Prime Minister announced the intention of having a new science policy, because that also has to do with the same Prime Minister announced the 2010 to 20 decade as decade of innovation for India. So there is always a connection to political ambitions to the policy documents. And then DST prepared the background notes from those intentions, and that is given to the identified chair. Chair got identified, and the committee is formed, and stakeholder consultation happened in seven times in 7 different places. More than 4,500 participants gave their comments, feedbacks, and maybe some questions on those policy drafts. And when we say 100 stakeholders participated, it's like 100 stakeholders from various sections: government stakeholders, industry stakeholders, academia, and non-governmental organizations. And the draft is presented to this is something that we did not mention in the previous slide, which is once the draft is finalized, we do have some of the apex bodies for SNT policy making in India. In this current case, we have PM STIP, Prime Minister Science, Technology, Innovation Advisory Council. But in the case of 2013, at that time, we had 2 committees, which are called SAC-C and SAC-PM, Science Advisory Committee to the Cabinet and Science Advisory Committee to the Prime Minister. So once this presentation is made, those 2 committees would have given some comments over those documents, and that is then taken back for adaptation. The draft then circulated to 25 ministries and departments. Based on their suggestions, policy was modified, which is amended, or suggestions were taken and incorporated and submitted to Cabinet for approval. Then the Cabinet approves the draft. After the approval, in Jan, the policy document STIP 2013 got released by the then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and the first copy was given to the President. At that time, we had Pranab Mukherjee as our President, and both happened during our Indian Science Congress 2013. So this is just to give how the recent policy document formation process was. So now we are entering into, let's say, the most interesting part. I hope you will not sleep in this section, which is discussion and our observations in this process and the policy making process. And now I would like to have Aditya to play a lead role.
Thank you, Chagun, for this presentation, and a very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. This was a lowdown on the science policy ecosystem in India. And as Chagun mentioned, that we'll be publishing a very detailed article on this topic. So please keep your eye out for that. Before we open the floor for questions, we would like to deliberate on some of the questions around the STI process and the ecosystem at large, based on what the presentation that Chagun presented. So the process you described to formulate STI policy seem very comprehensive. And as a resident expert in this space, and someone who's been working in close quarters with DST, do you think this process is systematic? What are some of your thoughts about the process in the consultation process?
Yeah, you can't make me say things which are going to be controversial, but I'm going to try that. So yeah, the process has evolved to become a systematic process. But I would also say we have to take this sentence with a pinch of salt, which is when we say evolved into a systematic process through various policy consultations and making process in past, we have reached to a level where everybody in the system knows how successfully this policy process could be conducted. The pinch of salt is this. It is not written anywhere that this is the process that one has to follow. Let's say if I do this and the existing people and system vanishes, there is no record of how the process has to be executed with the good practices.
So the best practices that evolved through the STI 2013 that you mentioned is not sort of institutionalized.
In a way, yes, but it also has its own pros and cons. I would personally prefer to have any process institutionalized than being individual centric. It's not bad, but at the same time, it is bad when it doesn't transfer to the next generation of practitioners.
So the next point, everybody talks about evidence-based policymaking. What is this? I mean, it seems very intuitive. Yes, policymaking should be backed by evidence. So what is this evidence-based policymaking? What can you comment a little bit about the evidence framework that is used in the STI policy process in India?
Yes, and this is something that it's not just in India; it's emerging everywhere around the world. Not just in STA policy process, also in every policy process, all the policy processes. And again, not only limited to a national perspective, also expanded, extensively used in international perspectives. When or in general, the word evidence is used in policy context, which means in low, simpler term, it's just that we are going to take some major decisions in a way of policy. And anybody want to be informed before taking the decision. And that information is what we call as evidence. And I mean, it's a very simpler term. The scholars in this field can debate over it, but for better understanding, this is how we can position. Exactly, evidence can come from many aspects. Like evidence can be directly data. So that's why sometime like a decade before, if you read the articles or scholarly articles of the policy field, you would say data-driven policy making. So, but then they moved from there, which is data cannot be the only evidence. So evidence can be from data, evidence can be from expert opinions, evidence can be from consultations. When I say consultations, they do come with studies. Let's say the science advice itself is an evidence, and science advice not necessarily come in quantitative form, can also come in qualitative form. And evidence, we can list out all the possible evidences, but as far as STA policy is concerned, we primarily mean the basic understanding of what exists in quantitative, qualitative forms, and that has to feed into the process.
And at what point are is this evidence introduced? Is it at a particular, you spoke about 7 rounds of consultation processes. So at what point is it introduced?
Yeah, there is no single point where evidence is introduced. There is no one consultation which is called, this is evidence consultation, so let's bring all the evidences into the room. Evidence get introduced into the policy process from the beginning till the end, maybe not till the end, but till the draft is finalized. The concentration of evidence is during the consultation. When I say from the beginning, the chair comes with his own or her own understanding of STA policy or the priorities that are set for this new policy, right? And for that, he would have or she would have collected or done some study on his own, or asked somebody like an academy or anybody to do some analysis, and that could form basis for initial evidence.
Okay.
And then during the consultation process, the stakeholders bring a lot of evidences, particularly the knowledge institutions like think tanks, government and private think tanks, from their extensive studies of all those years, because that is their full-time job, right? In a way to say that is their full portfolio of activity, not just like execution or anything, which is government side and academia about teaching and research. But bringing in evidences lies with knowledge institutions. So knowledge institutions, that's why we should have more and more knowledge institutions represented in these policy committees, because they bring in evidences. So I would say, to simply answer, during the consultation process, these knowledge institutions bring evidences in various forms. That forms could be like data reports, or simply like statistics of something, or like general reports or opinions directly.
You've been a DST policy fellow for 3 years now, and you've been working in this space for a while. What are some of the key elements that you'd like to see in this entire STI policy making process to keep pace with the the rapid pace at which science and technology is being introduced in our lives. So what are some of the top priorities that you think that this STI policy process should incorporate?
Let me try to understand the question a little bit. So you're asking, science and technology is we are in a complex world. We know and how science and technology is playing with the world, or like how fast it is changing. In that sense, how the policy process should be. Okay. One is by having a fast-paced feedback and adaptation loop in the policy process. And for that to happen, we need evaluation checkpoints, let's say. So the evaluation checkpoints are nothing but, like you said, when the change happens in any technology area or a drastic change in scientific discovery, we should be able to go back to our original policy priority or policy statements, whatever we made, and say that, okay, that is when we had something different, but that has grown into something else. Maybe that is just 2 months or 3 months after the policy is released, but we should be able to go back and adapt it so that the trickle-down effect of that policy doesn't just go for years and then we realized, okay, the times have changed, the system has changed. Right. So evaluation and adaptation is something that I would really say we need to.
And in the nice flowchart that you explained to us about citizen engagement. My questions to you are all these, the entire process sort of, is there an open door policy? When are citizens sort of tapped into this process? What do you have to?
Okay. It could be little, let's say, I don't want to make a controversial comment though, but at least in the recent times, the last 2 policies that I know, because we have studied how the policy process worked, and the public participation in this policy process is enormous. At least in 2013 policy document, which is quite recent, so we have more information about that policy process. The meetings were really happening in different institutions, not just in government setup. And when we say institutions, it's not only academic institutions, right? So sometimes academic institution has this glass door where general public, even if they have an opinion, they are reluctant to come, or sometimes they feel it's not their place to go and reflect the opinion. So the decision, the discussions and the consultation process for public actually happened in forums where even an 8-year-old, 9-year-old could just go through the document and comment about it. And somebody who is actually admitting his or her child in an engineering school can also see the document and make, okay, my kid is going to come out graduating from engineering in next 3-4 years. If this is the policy, then I have something to say about it. That also happened. The VST page had all the feedbacks recorded, and that was taken into. One important point I want to mention here related to this question is in 2013 policy documents connection. Professor T. Ramaswamy was secretary at that time for this policy document. He decided that it's fine, experts have debated and came up with a document, but we want a larger public to actually engage in this process. So he made that document to be rewritten. He actually asked few science communicators to come on board and rewrite the document jargon-free and make it as simple as possible. And then he put that on the site. So that I feel, although we cannot visibly see how many people have really engaged, but my assumption is many people really engaged because the language was simple and it was easy to get through.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. It's good that you mentioned the last point, because my follow-up question to you was that in any consultation process, it's well and good to have many stakeholders in, right? But not everybody has the same sort of understanding, or will have the same sort of understanding of the policy document. It can be written, say, by scientists or by policymakers or by somebody else who are experts in the field, who might use the scientific language pretty liberally, might not be able to really get feedback from the citizens based on those documents. So So there is some asymmetry there in the consultation process. So it's great to know that it's being done before, and I hope moving forward it can be sort of a priority, because getting feedback from citizens is extremely crucial. And in order to do that, the document or the policy should be communicated in such a way that they will be able to give that sort of feedback
directly. Just one thing crossed my mind when you were saying this. This is exactly why we need things to be institutionalized.
Right.
The institutional memory of this process has to be taken forward, so that these good practices can be directly translated into action in future.
Right.
If it is person-centric, we don't know whether it's going to be followed or not in down the line 15, 20 years after.
No, absolutely. Countries like United States, Switzerland, Japan, South Korea have been leading the way in terms of STI policy making, right? And kind of identifying the importance of science and technology for society at large. And there's a lot of literature out there about these countries, and not just about their current policy making, but the evolution of their STI policy. So I'm sure that this gives us an opportunity in India to kind of absorb all of this information and leapfrog. So do we adopt these best practices from these different countries in our own STI policy ecosystem?
Yeah, I kind of get what you are implying towards. Two parts to it. One is the cross learning, like you said, and also I like the way that you cherry pick those countries, because they are, let's say, economically advanced and they're technologically advanced, and it has to do with their correlation between how the technological advancement has to do with their economic prosperity.
Yeah.
And the bottom line here is all these countries that you mentioned have the gross expenditure on R&D 3 times, 4 times higher than ours, right? Which is 2% or about 2% than of their national GDP. So that being said, learning from them is of course going to be useful for us. The cross learning does happen. Institutionally, the cross learning process is just started, I would say. Thanks to the initiatives from BST, particularly the Policy Research Division of BST. Last 2 years, one learning visit was there to AAAS, and we had a chance to interact with OSTP and other policy making bodies.
Just to stop you there, can you tell people about what AAAS is and what OSTP is?
Yeah, of course. AAAS stands for American Association for Advancement of Science, and OSTP is Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House. So OSTP is kind of a government body which plays the apex role in STA policy making in US, and AAAS is a society, to say, but it primarily plays the role of knowledge broker or knowledge partner. And they do have a lot of expertise in informing not just their stakeholders, national players, but also international actors. Like when we say international actors, countries like India and any other country for that matter, can go and attend training programs and have meetings with them and try to get how their system works and what are the practices that we follow. And also directly take policies from their perspective and try to adapt it. I won't say like directly replicate it here. That will never work, in my opinion. And the adaptation is something we can do, any country can do. And the adaptation has to be done in a way where we do have absorption capacity locally. And that's another reason why we need policy professionals in India, so that this understanding happens and internally we have capacity, human capacity and institutional capacity to use those learnings and translate it. And just to continue answering your question, second year, the same DST Policy Research Division facilitated a visit to UK, and the cross learning happened. The second part of that whole answer is after learning, what do we do with that learning?
Right.
And currently, thanks to the fellowship that I'm currently in, there are a set of people, fellows, doing this as a full-time activity. So all we do is not just our own research, but also we take these cross learning and try to embed that into the process directly. And in my opinion, this should be in large scale, because India is such a vast country and we have a lot of policy priorities, not just limited to one or two, right? And adaptation has to happen. And I feel in terms of cross learning, it is happening, but in adaptation, we need to still work on and see how the channels of adaptations are, how strong they are.
One final question to you is, you very nicely explained what science policy is and what science advice is and the distinction. People use the word science policy very liberally. I probably am guilty of that as well. So that was a very clear description of what the two things are. So would you call international scientific engagement, as or international scientific collaboration as part of what you call as science policy?
Yes, this is a very interesting question. Science policy, or let's say when we say science policy, we are not only meaning the science for policy, right? We are also meaning the science. Okay, when we say science policy, it is policies that are made for science. The term science policy is so generic. We also include science, technology, innovation, everything into that. This is, let's say, verticals. In horizontals, science, technology, innovation policy has so many components. And one of the major components, at least in near future and currently, is international engagement in science and technology space. And particularly, people now take science diplomacy as a major activity within the realm of national science policy. So if you take, let's say, the French science policy documents, there are sections which specifically talk about how they want to look international scientific engagements as part of their national science policy agenda. And that, I would say, international scientific collaboration is very much part of science policy building block.
And is science diplomacy part of our STI policy agenda? In
India, you would be surprised to know the 2013 document is the first time we have seen the word science diplomacy mentioned explicitly in the policy document. Okay, I would be even giving the exact page number, but I'm not going to do that. But it is just the word, right? And
that's very critical.
It's actually clubbed with big science participation, all that. And that is where we need one more important point when we are talking about STA policy. The policy documents come, and let's say those are a bulletin list of what we mean and what we want to do. But how we do it also has to be spelled out,
right?
Because our government functions in a very intricate manner. Government functioning itself is a separate topic of discussion to understand how it works, right? There are so many blocks, so many agencies, so many ministries. If a policy document is put forth, who are the actors who are going to own that policy document in the implementation and execution process? For that to happen, we also need to spell out what are the actions that are meant to be. So policy document always has to accompany an action document. So in that, we have to also maybe list down under science diplomacy what are activities that we mean is important.
So those were some of my questions to Chagun. So my time to grill Chagun is done. Maybe we can open the floor for some questions from our audience.
Yeah, it is not going to be a one-man drilling. He's also going to be grilled, let's say.
National science diplomacy. Could you please mention a case study?
Yeah. Do you want to take the question, Aditya?
I mean, science diplomacy, as what Chagun mentioned, international scientific collaboration is being done by several academic institutions for the longest period, right? And there are several partnerships in India, France, India, Australia, India, United States, on various different elements in science diplomacy. But in terms of even with respect to the ministries involved in international scientific engagement, what about you? Can you share an example?
I mean, science diplomacy is a topic that we both are personally very passionate about. We would be happy to have another full webinar on it. But to directly answer your question, Kuldeep, India do stand in the center of international science diplomacy as of today through two major initiatives. One, because you have asked for this question, one is an International Solar Alliance. India took the lead, and that's a major science diplomacy move, and that is drafted out through a policy document, and France joined in as a co-chair of India's International Solar Alliance initiative. This is a very classic example. Nobody has studied it so far, but in, let's say, in 5-10 years, we would have some major study coming out of how International Solar Alliance by India is a international science diplomacy example. The second one is about our ocean engagement. Our Arabic and Indian Ocean side countries come together for predictive model studies, and IISc is also directly part of those consortia. And I won't be able to give more details on it, but these are the two examples I could give. But we would be happy to have one complete session on science diplomacy.
Just to add to what Chagun said, science diplomacy as a topic is also something that has been evolving over the last decade or so. It's taken more prominence in this decade. And even though we as in India has been doing, or several institutions within India has been doing a lot of international scientific engagement, but science in diplomacy is not probably institutionalized or structured as in other countries. For example, the role of science and technology in, say, international relations is something is not seen as much in the Indian context, but it is gaining a lot of prominence in the international context. So that's something that we foresee India moving in that direction.
Debayan's question is here. He joined in down. Yeah, how do STA policies differ from central versus state government universities and research institutions? How do you distribute research fund across university institutions? How do you prioritize what kind of research should be getting more funding? Once a policy has been implemented, is there any evaluation that is done to check the effectiveness of it? Wow, that's
yeah. And apologies for the black background. We just lost electricity here, so that should be coming up soon. But I hope you'll be able to hear us still. So Chagun, you want to take that? Yes.
There are like 1, 2, 3, 4
Maybe you can
questions.
answer one question.
Yeah. So see, the state versus central. Okay, the question is not about state versus central STA policies. The question is about how do STA policies differ from state and central universities, research institutions. Okay, this is a more targeted, specific question, right? The STA policy that central makes is a national policy. And in an ideal world, in an ideal situation, that has to be applied in all the states, irrespective of state institution or central institution. But we do also have state S&T councils and state bodies which make priorities for states. And the matching of priorities between the center's STA policy and state STA priority policy or agenda, whatever they call it, is something that we have to look into a little deeper. As far as the university fundings are concerned, that's kind of your second question connected to the first one. University fundings are concerned, there is always this complaint. I won't call it a complaint, but people are seeing this differentiation between IITs, IICs, and ICERs, the central institutions, and state institutions and state universities. This for sure has to be addressed through policy, but right now I don't know how we can exactly do it.
Do we have time to take one more question? One more? Okay. Who else had joined us?
We can go to the let's get a question from a woman, maybe Vanshika Singh. Asheshta,
yeah. So these days, science communication is introduced as an academic course as well. So what are your ideas on introducing science policy to such students and scholars in their course of studies?
You want to take it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a topic that we've been discussing for the longest time. You know, scientists and engineers kind of get a bad name, saying that, okay, you guys can't communicate well enough for the policymakers to, or even for the general public to understand the work that you're doing. And you know, of course, scientists and engineers need to be better communicators, but I think so do everybody else. And we are more aware about this this gap between this is one of the clear gap between science and policy, and the fault lies on both sides. I think it's very critical to introduce science communication courses, and it is being done. There are several training workshop exercises all around India that teach scientists and engineers how to communicate their idea to the general public or the policymakers. But also we need to realize that this communication bit is not a soft skill as a lot of people consider it to be. It requires a professional to be able to communicate a particular idea, and you know, with several avenues out there at the moment, you know, right from podcast, webinars, social media, there are professionals out there who do this job. So it's about trying to build that capacity too. Science institution trying to build that communication capacity, not just scientists to be better communicators, but creating that capacity from both from the both academic side and also from the policy making side. I think would be a way forward. That is how I would look at it.
Yeah,
Chagun?
just to add a line to Shesha's question, science communication is become a broad area of studies now, right? Practicing as well as the studies. Communicating science to scientific community itself, and communicating science to policymakers, and communicating science to general public. And the specialization actually goes deeper even within these sections. As far as science policy is concerned, we have very few science communicators as of today in the country who directly translate science in a broader sense to policy, because we know the challenges exist in both sides, not just the sciences side, policy side also. The understanding of how you have to observe this is lies. So I would say the specialization have to go a little deeper. I think in UK, in other countries, US also, it has gone little far in terms of creating specialized professionals. Elevator pitch itself is a 6 months course. I was so astonished to know that elevator pitch to a policy maker or a policy bureaucrat itself is a 6 months long diploma course in US. And I don't know how much that we do here. I'm also interested to learn more how these are all being done. If our expertise in some form is required, we would be happy to do that.
Yeah, and you know, just to add to this point, as someone who's you know, I've gone to graduate school in both sciences and in policy, and there's a clear distinction in how we communicate our material. And in policy, you know, studies, there's a lot of deliberation, discourse, simulation in this area that makes you a better communicator, and that isn't as much in sciences. And maybe that's, as Shrestha, you pointed out, it should be included in our education system, and not just at undergraduate or graduate level, but much before that as well, to make people more confident to be able to communicate their ideas and their views.
That was excellent, both of you. But we will before we close, and thank you all for staying with us also. But before we close, we will share the Science Policy Forum page with you, which we are really excited about. Okay, so again, like I said, this is the start of a new initiative called the Science Policy Forum, and that forum is hosted on the IndiaBiostreams website, but it is a collaborative forum which all of you can be a part of. Okay, so we're kickstarting this forum with this webinar, but it's just the beginning. So this is already populated with relevant content, and as you can see, this webinar will be uploaded here, and so the article also that relating to the content of this webinar will be uploaded. It will be uploaded here, so you can continue the discussion offline on that article. So if you go here, there is a discussion forum on which you can start your own topic as well. Okay, so I invite all of you to join the Science Policy Forum, and I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Well, right after the end of this webinar, you'll have a feedback form to fill. So please take a moment while you're fresh with experience to let us know what you thought, or if you have ideas for what we can do next. And we'll also share with you in a follow-up email, save the date link for our next webinar. Thank you all, and see you soon from the Science Policy Forum and the team at IndiaBiostreams.